Okay, so this is our first real lecture for human development and child development in childhood. So we're looking at children before they're born all the way up until they're 10, 11, 12. So what we're going to be looking about today, I always like to give an introduction so you know what you're getting into. It's student learning outcomes and our course description, and we're going to be looking at it from the lifespan model, which was really kind of pioneered by Uri Brofenbrenner from our 1970s, taking kind of what we had known about child development and adding to it by kind of putting the ecological spin on it. So who we are, where we are, what our development is being influenced by development, and us in turn influencing our environment around us. Then we're really going to be looking at our pre-seed proceed model today. But because this is 302, we're really more concerned with the pre-seed phase. So we're looking at it as a whole, but we're mostly concerned with the pre-seed section. And then at the very end, they hope to link it all together. Why are we studying lifespan development? Why do we care about how children develop it? And how can we use the pre-seed proceed model in order to affect their development? So our course description really tells us that we are gaining knowledge about child development. So that's really what I'm here to do. Is I have almost 20 years in my field. I have a bachelor's degree in child development and a master's in childhood studies. So I'm kind of trying to impart some of my knowledge about how children learn, and also my practitioner wisdom and experience. I'm going to give you lots of examples from both my home life as a mother of 3, and then also with working with children with special needs, and then also working within preschools and toddler programs, things like that. So I'm going to be giving you examples as we go along. Then we're looking at the pre-seed proceed model. Sometimes I will abbreviate it to the PP model to save time and space. And we're going to be looking throughout this class at theories and issues from conception all the way to late childhood. Like I said, it's zero, so before you're born, all the way until kind of 10, 11, 12. There's no hard and fast. At 12, you are now a teenager. You know, my dad thought at 10 you were a teenager. We're kind of learning more about brain development and how our brains are changing, and that's kind of affecting the blurring of the lines as well. After this class, you'll take one that is concerned with adolescence and early adulthood as well. And then we're also going to be looking at the skills that you need to conduct a plan and to plan a community intervention program. So we're not going to do something that had been previous classes, but right now we are trying to look at getting specific information about how do you plan a community intervention program, and we're going to be doing that a lot through our forums and through our additional readings, where I will give you specific policy papers and research papers that have been done about using the pre-seed proceed model and how that affects our community intervention. Because I really believe that theory without practice is fairly meaningless. So I want you to be able to take this theoretical knowledge that I'm imparting on you guys, and I want you to see how do you take that and how do you use the pre-seed proceed model in order to affect real and meaningful changes for children and their well-being. Student learning outcomes for this entire class is that child development. So we are taking the understanding that we have of child development and how children learn, and we're using that to identify and diagnose issues that affect the health and well-being of children in a community. Then we're learning about developing intervention programs for healthy child development. So we really want to give you the understanding of children so that you can make decisions about what changes need to happen within your community. So I want to make sure that you understand how this pre-seed proceed model is broken down over the other classes as well. So 302 is really the child development, conception to 11, 12 years old. And we're really looking at the pre-seed phase, which is this process of submitting a program proposal. And we're going to talk about that in more in these other classes as well. And then we have the remainder of the steps. So there's the proceed phase is going to be covered in 303 and 304. So implementation of a program and then program evaluation, that's all in different classes. So I'm really going to be focusing on the pre-seed phase, so the process phase, and then link it in with child development. So when we come to the pre-seed phase, really how are we looking at how children develop through conception and infancy into mild childhood, so that we can identify those community and health interventions. So it's really, when I'm talking about well-being, I'm looking at community and health intervention programs for children in order to affect their well-being. So lifespan development. how does how we grow impact how we are helped? So who we are and how we are learning about children and how do we influence their development? How is that being changed and how do they grow? How is that being changed by brain development, by theory, by perspectives? Because that's going to impact how they grow and how we help. So the 5 characteristics of lifespan development is that it's multidimensional, it's multidirectional, it's influenced by multiple factors, it's plastic, and it's a lifelong process of losses. So I want to kind of give a personal example of this, of kind of how the philosophical idea, I guess, of lifespan development is that we all grow and decline in many areas over our lifespan. So myself, I'm a middle-aged mom of 3, and a couple years ago, I decided that I wanted to go from being able to run 1.5 miles, you know, maybe doing the turkey trot, a 5K, or the strawberry run. Not a lot of mileage. I, on a whim, signed up for a running group, and I decided to run a 10-mile race. So I'm going from 1 to tops 3 miles into training to run 10 miles at a time. So I signed up for this. I'm training. I'm running 20 to 30 miles a week, 3 to 4 miles every day. And then once or twice a week, I had a long run that was anywhere between 7 to 10 miles. You'd see me out on Coast Highway. I'm running along. I'm a super slow runner, 9 miles, but I was getting it done. It was actually running. But in my kind of jump to become a runner, a real serious runner, I have running shoes, you know, all that type of stuff. You know, I went to a running store and bought running shoes. I didn't just get them at Target. I kind of stopped stretching. I, you know, maybe touch my toes and do a lunge or 2, and then I just ran. And so I went to a yoga class right before my run because I thought, oh, I got to loosen up. I got to limber for my race. I could barely touch my toes. I didn't have a lot of strength in my upper body anymore. I kind of had this weird gait for me because my posture was off. So in my goal to get this gain of mileage, I had a process of getting a loss, which was my flexibility. So that's just an example in one domain, in my physical domain. I had both a gain and loss in middle age time period. So that's just an example of kind of how we can use this lifespan development and how it affects us in our entire lives, how we are learning and growing. But it is a lifelong process. So we are always experiencing age-related changes. So some potentials are developing and other potentials are declining over our entire lifespan. So from the moment we're born till we take our last breath, we are changing, evolving human beings. So for an infant, they lose some potential. So if I was to ask you to crawl around on the floor, you couldn't crawl as fast as an infant. There's no way. Infants don't have a lot of cartilage in their knees. It's still growing. They really kind of don't have kneecaps in order so that they can crawl. But you, as people and very young people in your 20s, you're not going to be as creaky as me, but you're not going to be as fast as an 11-month-old. That's because they have a lot more potential in this area because it impacts their development. We want them to crawl because that's a really necessary physical step, and it's also a really necessary brain development step. We'll go more into that later. So crawling is really important. So they have biologically set up some things in order to let them do that. So we lose that potential. We don't have the potential to crawl fast anymore, but an infant does. So that's an example in lifespan development. How it's a lifelong process. We don't have a potential to crawl, an infant does, but they can't walk yet. Or sucking from a bottle, you know, or nursing, something like that. That would be really distasteful to us to suddenly have to get all of our nutrition from a liquid source and to suck to do it. We don't have the sucky muscles anymore. It's not something that we should be doing. That's not how we really should be getting our nutrition anymore. It's something an infant can do that an adult can't do. And then older adults as well. So being a mother, you know, I'm learning from my mother, and I'm learning from my husband's grandmother, who's my children's great grandmother, who's still alive, who lived through the Depression and World War II and stuff like that. She's giving me her wisdom and practice in order to apply it to my own life and my particular experiences being a mother. So that's one way that I'm getting kind of wisdom and emotional help from the older people in my life, so they have a real potential to pass that on to me. And then the amount of losses and gains changes as we grow. So as we get older, the ratio of gain over losses it's larger for you guys. So you guys kind of have more ability generally to learn new things and to lose new things, and it's a greater ratio when you are younger than versus when you are older. And then with lifespan development as well, it's multidimensional. So typically, traditional kind of child development was focused more on our stages. So if you look at Erickson's social and emotional development, trust versus mistrust, going all the way up into old age, it was really just kind of focused on the social and emotional. And then Piaget, he was very influenced on cognitive development, and he was interested in how we learn. We're actually finding from brain development that what they said is absolutely true. You know, there might be some little tweaks and stuff like that that we've kind of learned. It might have started a little bit early, finished a little bit later. But what they said generally is still really true about children, and we will be talking about this all over again. I know you've had an introduction to it, but we will be going over our stage theorists as well. But we also, within our lifespan theory, want to see them as connected. So they are interrelated, they are associated with each other over our entire lifespan. So once again, in my work as an early interventionist, I work with children 0 to 3. I do direct care. I either work with the parents or with the child, doing parent coaching, or helping the parents kind of set up therapy for their children who might have a variety of special needs. I work a lot with children in foster care, so they've been removed from their home, and I either work with the adoptive parents or the foster parents, or I also work with the parents that are hoping to reunify, kind of working on social and emotional things. And I also work with children who have been identified as having social and communication delays. So that's kind of maybe children that might be on the autistic spectrum. In this job, every 6 months, I do a 2 to 3 page report on each child. And that's kind of why I have a research paper, and that's why you have writing requirements here at Cal State, is because it's not just this thing we just want you to write. It's annoying. You know, I have to grade all of these things. If I could, I would kind of get rid of it. That's a lot of grading. That's hours and hours of grading. But it's really important that you guys learn how to write. So I write a lot in my job. You will have to write a lot in your job, and you need to be able to effectively communicate what you've learned. So I have these reports that I have learned how to write, both from learning how to write within my college degree and then professionally learning how to write as well. So it is really important that you learn this. But getting back to the report, so I have to talk about a specific child in all areas of their development. So we are very strength-based. So we always talk about what the child can do versus what they can't do. So we look at gross motor development, fine motor development, language or communication, social and emotional, self-help, and cognitive. But when I am doing this, although they have their own separate paragraphs about what they can do and the age range that I would kind of generally put them at. So you know, maybe this 26-month-old is more an 18-month-old level when it comes to development. But by writing this, I am always amazed at how interrelated they are. So if I'm looking at a child who has autism, their autistic behaviors could be impacting all areas of their development. So for example, if a child walks on their tiptoes, and that's very common for toddlers who have social and communication delays or are on the autistic spectrum to walk on their tiptoe, that affects how we move our body. That affects balance, positioning, strength, flexibility. All of those things are affected by how our feet hit the ground. So their gross motor development is going to be affected by the fact that they walk on their tiptoes. Then when I look at fine motor development, how they sensory process things is going to affect how they hold the pen with their hand. So are they holding it like this, like this? They don't want to hold it. You know, there's a lot of different ways by how you process your sensory information that affects your fine motor ability. And children on the autistic spectrum can be often overwhelmed by sensory materials and things like that, or holding pencils and things like that can be affected. Then when we look at cognitive, or when we look at communication and the ability to communicate, maybe you are not verbal. You sometimes the verbal ability comes later or not at all, depending on the severity of the autism that you have on the autistic spectrum. So that's going to affect your ability to communicate. Are you still using signs? Can you use signs? Can you not use signs? That type of stuff is going to be affected by it as well. So that's kind of just giving you an example of, in my realm, special education, how is your ability, your diagnosis, or maybe not even a diagnosis, but kind of how you engage in behaviors within the world, in fact, impacts all the domain areas. So that's why it's multidimensional. They don't just exist separate from each other, they are all interrelated. Then it's multi-directional. So before we kind of had this idea of a bell curve. So you started here, 0, nothing, babies don't know anything. Yeah, right, babies can do a lot of things. And we'll go over that in the next couple weeks. All the way to kind of adulthood up here, you can do everything. You're an adult, you're adulting, yay. And then it declines and you're back down here as you're old and you're used to it. Because kind of our lifespan development before, but this multidimensional image kind of shows that it really changes. It's not a bell graph in all areas of development. So the blue line is kind of your motor ability, your physical ability. The red line is cognitive development, language development, kind of how you talk, think, and learn. And then the green line is your social and emotional state. And you can see it's not a bar graph. And so it's changing throughout your lifespan. So they actually are reaching their highest level of social and emotional ability later in life. But our gross motor is peaking really, really early because we're learning how to run, to jump, to ride bikes much earlier in life, and that's going to decline, unfortunately, as we get older. So this is just an example of it's multi-directional. It doesn't follow each other on its own path because our domains are really different, and it's really influenced by where we are in our lifespan, and then also our temperament and our kind of ability to want to keep up. And then they're also, we're influenced by many theories and perspectives. So really today, this is kind of based on the ideas of Uri Brofenbrenner, who kind of pioneered this idea of bioecological systems. So we have an entire class on that here at Cal State. But in the 70s, kind of looking at environmental factors. So who I am impacts my environment, and my environment impacts me as a person. So we're looking at nature, nurture, and then it's also epigenetics. Epigenetics is above genetics. If you haven't looked into it, we will go more into it, but I find it absolutely fascinating. It's kind of the idea that who we are genetically, our genetic makeup as individuals can be affected by the environment around us. So it takes kind of the idea of the bioecological system, so our environmental factors, and it takes it to this kind of extreme where it can change who we are at like a cellular, molecular, DNA level, which I just find fascinating. But it's also plastic. So not plastic in like the little plastic toys that you get at McDonald's. Plastic in the idea that we are adaptive. So we change from the moment we're born to our last breath, like I said. Who we are changing to our environment. We're changing to the things that we can do in our adulthood and what we can't do in our adulthood. It's just constantly changing. It's adaptable and it's plastic. So then we're taking this pre-seed, proceed model, and we're looking at how can we use child development to diagnose factors that affect children. So most of this class is really concerned with the pre-seed phase. So kind of when we're looking at the pre-seed, proceed model, it's really just a tool. It's a way, it's a thing that we can use to help us to diagnose health behaviors, or to look at problems at the individual and environmental level and come up with ways that we can change them. So we can affect outcomes by identifying health and community behaviors and changing those. And it's also looking at the methods to diagnose the factors. So there's a lot of research to back up this pre-seed, proceed model. A lot of ways they're saying across communities and across ages and across cultural and racial barriers, there's lots of ways that we can help community well-being, and the pre-seed, proceed model is a really good research way to do that. And then, maybe you didn't know this, but the pre-seed, proceed is actually an acronym, and it's actually a really good acronym. A lot of times I feel like they come up with something and they try to make it fit, but in this case, it actually makes sense. So it stands for predisposing, reinforcing, enabling, causes in educational diagnosis and evaluation. So those first three, PRE, are actually the process. So they are the three factors that are going to influence the outcomes that we're looking at. So predisposing factor, reinforcing factor, and enabling factors, and the causes for that in educational diagnosis and evaluation. And I'm going to go on to the next image to give you a little bit more background on this. Okay, so we're just talking about those three factors. So our three factors are predisposing, enabling, and reinforcing. That's the pre. And those factors are what affect our outcomes of behavior, health status, lifestyle outcomes, and environment. So those are kind of we're looking at these different kinds of outcomes. So what do we want to achieve? What do we want the end result to be? And what are the 3 factors that impact what those outcomes can be? And then at the very end, we're looking at policies, resource, and organization and services that we need to implement it. And that's the first part. That's the pre-seed phase. I'm going to go on to the next slide, which is going to give you an example because I think it's a little bit more helpful to kind of get an overview of this. So our example is that it's coming from a paper that I have linked this week. So this is one of your additional readings, is Strengthening Public Health and Disaster Relatedness in Samoa using the Pre-Seed Proceed model. So my big head is covering the first phase. So it's all the way on the right-hand side. And that is our outcome. So that's phase 1. It's called social assessment, and that's our outcome. So we are kind of identifying that these villages need to have safety zones. They need to have improved evacuation routes. We need to have more readiness meetings, more like media PSAs, and then just in general, better disaster preparedness. So that is our outcome. So that's the very first part of the pre-seed phase. Then the second part is our impact. So that's our epidemiological assessment. So mobility and the ability to evacuate is being influenced by some obesity-related concerns. And then in our phase 3 is educational and ecological assessment. So we know that there are lots of, this is where we kind of identify education, skills, and environment requirements that we are going to need to hit our outcomes. So we need to know what are the knowledge and attitudes about tsunamis, and how are people prepared? How are families prepared? What is the media telling us? And then what are the wellness centers and outreach centers telling us? Or what kind of services are they providing? And then our very last one, so on the left-hand side, we're going, I know it's a little unusual, we're going from right to left. So then our phase 4 is kind of that last one where we're looking at policy, money, and services. So we're looking at what do we need? We need better evacuation routes. We need to know, people need to know how to get out of the tsunami's path. We need to have safety zones. So if you're getting out of its path, where do you go? And then village meetings. How are we going to take this information and get it out to people? And then community gardens, so we can have fresh fruits and vegetables that are not prohibitively expensive for people to eat. So lifestyle and nutrition, we need lots of education for people, and we need a lot of community planning and things like that. So these are the kind of the educational strategies, and then policy, regulation, and organization that we're going to need in order to impact the factors and then ultimately impact the outcome of what we want. Then linking. So how are we going to identify programs for healthy child development? So I think my big head is covering that again, so I will read this to you. So in this class, we will strive to understand how children develop by using ecological and lifespan development. So it's plastic, it's multidimensional, it's affected by factors, in order to identify outcomes, resources, and factors that can be changed to positively impact children's well-being. So once again, we're striving to understand how children develop by mostly using the ecological and lifespan development in order to identify outcomes, resources, and factors, that's that PP model, that can be useful to positively impact children's well-being. So in this class, over the next couple of weeks, we're going to go really chronological. So next week we'll start with conception, and we'll start with genetics and heredity and stuff like that. Move into infancy, toddlerhood, preschool age, and the middle childhood. And then at the very end, we'll kind of get into some special issues about more social and emotional resiliency, child abuse. If you ever take a class with me, I always talk about child abuse. It's one of our most important responsibilities, I think, as humans, is to take care of the most vulnerable among us, people that cannot consent to anything. So animals, young children, and then adults who have been identified as not being able to take care of themselves. I think those are the most vulnerable among us. And so identifying ways that we can help those kind of children, I think, is one of our utmost responsibilities as a society, as a community, and then just as individuals. So I always kind of talk about those kind of issues at the end, and I call them kind of special issues. So that's kind of what the next couple steps of this class is going to be. But then we're going to take those child development theories and perspectives and practices, and we're going to relate it to community issues and programs. And that's how we're going to highlight the pre-seed proceed model. So we're going to be working through people that are already using this model, so that you can kind of get a working idea of how to identify outcomes in order to use child development to impact children's overall well-being. So that's it for this lecture for this week. You also have a forum discussion worth 2 points where we talk about lifespan development. And then we are also going to have 2 additional readings, one from America Samoa, that was that example I gave to you a couple slides ago, and then also from a student paper from another university about ergonomics and cashiers. So people who are like checking out all day and having to stand on their feet, how somebody was using the pre-seed proceed model in order to affect some ergonomic issues with grocery store checkers. So that is what actually is going to be your article reflection. So this week I have really specific instructions from our syllabus on how to write the weekly article reflection, and I've also included the rubric. It will be the same for all consequent weekly article reflections, so I'm not going to post that each week. If you need to go back and see what the rubric was or what the specific instructions were, they are on the syllabus and they will continue to be the same for all subsequent assignments. So thanks so much. If you have any questions, please reach out to me by email. I'm always ready and eager to hear from you guys. Thanks so much. Have a great week. Bye.